Hello guys, so in this last part of the React login app, we're gonna create the backend API for our login app. So in the last tutorial, we finished building the user interface for the front end for the login app, and we also built the actual project. So go ahead and open up the folder where you did the build, copy the build folder, create a new folder called backend where we're gonna create the backend, and paste the build folder in the backend folder. Now we're gonna go ahead and open up a command prompt, and we're gonna initialize a new npm project. So go ahead and cd in to the folder we just created. Mine is called backend, and type npm in it. We can call the package name backend version 1, no description. Change the entry point to main.js, and the rest can just keep as it is. Go ahead and open up the project in your preferred text editor. We're also gonna go ahead and install a couple of dependencies right now that we're gonna need. So let's start with bcrypt, which we're gonna use to hash the passwords for the users. We're also gonna install Express. And we're also gonna install Express MySQL session, which is the session store we're gonna use. And then we're also gonna install Express session, which is the session we will use, of course. And we're also gonna need MySQL to connect to a MySQL database. Now my fan is sounding really a lot here on my computer. I'm just gonna see if I can turn it off a bit. Yep. Like that, so the sound is not disturbing the microphone. So let's see here. Now we got all the dependencies installed, perfect. Then it's gonna add a start script here as well. So in package.json under scripts, go ahead and add start. And for start, we're gonna say node main to start our main file in the Node.js server. All right. Now, before we start writing any code, we're gonna go ahead and create the database we're gonna use to store our users. Now, I would recommend that you use WAMP on Windows or XAMPP on Mac. You can just Google them and install them. They give you access to Apache, MySQL, and PHP on Windows and Mac. After you have installed WAMP or XAMPP, go ahead and visit localhost/phpMyAdmin, and here we can access and play around with our databases. All right. So once you've done that, go to databases. We're gonna create a new database. We can call this my app. You can set collation to UTF-8 line bin. Create. So now we have an empty database, no tables. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a table called user where we will store the username and password of our users. We're also gonna store a primary ID, which is gonna be an auto increment, which will keep each ID of each user unique. So user and number of columns should be 3, and then go. So for the first field here, we can call it ID, the second username, and the third password. Now this is gonna be an int for integer, and we can set it to primary and go. We're also gonna set this one to auto increment. So for each new user that is added, it increments the ID to keep the ID unique. I'm gonna use a varchar here for simple text. We can set the length to 240. and keep it like that and hit save. So that's it. We got a simple table here in our database. We don't have to insert a user yet, because first we're gonna have to generate a password. We're gonna use bcrypt to hash our passwords. So go ahead and open up the project here and add a new file. We can call this file gen password for generate password. And in here we're gonna require bcrypt. Now this is only gonna be used to actually create a password, a hashed password for our users, because we don't have a register page, so we're gonna add them manually. So bcrypt uses a 128-bit salt to hash the password. So it's basically only reversible. The password is only reversible if you know the salt. So let's go ahead and create a password here real quick. And bcrypt dot. We can use hash sync. And let's just add a simple password. 12345 can be your password. We're just gonna pass a number here. Now this is the number of letters that bcrypt is gonna use in the salt, so we don't have to define a salt ourselves. It's gonna be a random salt. And that console will log the password. Now I'm just gonna hit CTRL-B to run this in Sublime. Cannot find model. Oops, bcrypt like that. How do I spell bcrypt? Like that. You could also open up your terminal command prompt and write node gen password to run the file, just so you get the password. Alright, so we're just gonna go ahead and copy that. Open up php.myadmin, hit insert, username. The username for this guy can be John, and paste the password. Let's go. Let's insert another user. Yes, so we got two users to play around with. We can keep the same password here for that user in this case. Alright, so we got the generated password and the username for two users here that we can try to log in with. Alright, so go ahead and close the gen password because we won't use it right now. Now we're going to create the actual main.js file, which is going to be our server. It's also going to handle creating a session and a MySQL connection to database. So create a new file, call it main.js. And we're going to start by including a couple of things here. First off, express. And app, which is going to be express. We're also going to need path, which comes with node pre-installed. Gonna need MySQL. We're gonna need session. We're gonna need a MySQL store, which is gonna be express MySQL session. And here we're gonna pass an argument with the session that we're importing here, right? We're also gonna create our own router. We'll keep our routes. So we can go ahead and write the import for that right now. Require, let's see here, from the root folder, router. Alright, let's just tidy this up a bit. Like that, let's also create the router file right now, just to define it, so node doesn't crash. So create a new file, name it router.js. We're just gonna create a class here, and we will finish this later, and then export it. All right. So we're gonna go ahead and create the actual router later in this tutorial. So now that should be everything we need. Yep. So now we're just gonna say app.use express.static path.join. I'm gonna use double underline dir name and build. So this tells Express to serve or static build folder, right? And we're also gonna need app.use express.json, so we can use JSON to post data back and forth to the front end. All right. Now let's just write console.log testing server. Let's go ahead and try npm start to start it. So yeah, everything's working all right. So next up, we're gonna create a database connection. So create a new constant. I'm using constant here because these values won't change, all right? They are always the same. So that's why you define a constant. MySQL is the library we'll use, and the method is create connection. Takes a couple of arguments here. Also properties. I'm gonna start by host, localhost, since we're running our WAMP server or XAMPP server on a local client. User, I'm using root and password root. Now you might have different settings for this, but just go ahead and add your credential for the MySQL user and password. And then database is the database we just created, so my app, right? So that's the actual connection. I'm also gonna have to connect, so db connect. Let's go ahead and make this into a function. So if we get any errors, we can console.log them. db error, just like that. So if error, say db error, and also let's do a throw here so we can see the actual error itself. And if that happens, we will also return, so no code below this is executed. So let's see if we type npm start. So we have no errors, which means we are getting connected to the database. Also make sure you have started WAMP or XAMPP before you do this. Otherwise you will get an error, of course, because it can't connect. Alright, so next up is we're going to create a session store. The session store it'll internally create a MySQL connection pool, which handles connections to the database. Now this is a production ready MySQL store, which is better than the one used by default by Express. So this one handles memory a lot better. So add a new const session store and create a new MySQL store. I'm gonna pause a couple of properties here. First one is expiration. This is the expiration for the store, and this is in milliseconds. We can set this to about 5 years, which would be 1825 multiplied with 86,400 multiplied with 1,000. So this store will expire in 5 years. That's a long session, but for this example we can use that. And connection on close. Yeah, so if you want to end the database connection, when the store is closed. We can set this to false. I'm also gonna have to pass in the DB in this configuration. All right. Then we're also gonna head and create the actual session where we will use this store. For that, we're gonna use the express session. So app use session. Gonna pass in a couple of configuration options here as well. We're gonna set a key here. You can set it to something random like that. I'm also gonna need a secret. Set it to something random again. And for the store, we're gonna use our session store to store the session data. This is also gonna create a session table in our database. It will do that automatically so that we don't have to define it ourselves. And then resave false, save initialized false, and some cookie settings for the session. I'm gonna set the max age as well in milliseconds. We can go ahead and copy this. So about 5 years, so it basically never dies. And HTTP only false, because we want this to be HTTPS as well. All right, so let's type npm start to see that we got everything correct here. And yes, line 43. Oops. Typo there. And there we go, everything seems to be running. Now we're also gonna go ahead and create our own router, which we defined earlier, the class router. We're gonna use dependency injection here to access the app, right? And also the DB, so the database connection. This will allow us to scale the application better by using a class-based router. And then we're also going to actually serve the build from the front end. So to do that, we're going to use Express. So app-get. So this is the home page. Then we're going to send file. And again, use path join. We're going to use dir name. Build folder, right? And we want to serve index.html. And then we also have to tell the app to listen on a port. So let's tell this app to listen on port 3000. So let's go ahead and start this up and see what we got. And then open up localhost. Port 3000, as you can see now, Node.js is actually serving our front end, which is perfect. So this also means that we're gonna be able to create our API and access the API from the front end. All right, without using CORS or something like that for cross-origin resource sharing. So this is gonna be pretty simple to set up from now on. So now we just have to actually create our router. So we can go ahead and close main.js, open up router.js. So this is gonna contain our actual API endpoints. We can start by including a library here. We're gonna need bcrypt in this class as well. So require bcrypt, and then define a constructor for the router, and we want to access app and DB, so we can access this in each route. So let's just go ahead and define our routes. We're gonna need a route called login, right? if you open up the front end project and go to login form, you can see here in the do login method that we created a call to the API endpoint login. So this is what we're gonna create now, and if we look at the file here, or at the code here, you can see that we're sending username and password. So we know we're gonna retrieve the username and password in the router. We're also gonna send back success. We're also gonna send back username. If there's an error, we're gonna send back a message with error, all right? So simply by looking at the code here, we can see exactly what we have to create in the API. We're also gonna need a logout function, same thing there, we defined it in the UI. And in app.js, in front end, we created a call to isLogin to check whether or not the user is actually logged in. If a session is set, it's called right here, right? So we're gonna need that endpoint as well. So let's just go ahead and define the actual method here as well. Log in, log out, and is logged in. And we're gonna pass the app and DB to each of these. So let's start with the login route. So each one of these methods is actually a route right now, right? So for this, we're gonna use post, which we defined in the front end. We're gonna get the requests and also the response. We need the username. We can access this by using rec.body.username. We also need the password, request.body.password. Just to try this out, let's see what happens if we console.log the username. So let's go ahead and start up the server. And let's see here if we just type some random stuff, log in, and as you can see, we're getting the username here. Right? So everything seems to be working. The same thing for password. Now what we can do as well is we can use the toLowercase function in JavaScript to make sure the username is always in lowercase. I'm also going to change this John to a small first letter, right? So this is something you would implement basically in the verification or the validation when logging in, to make sure that all characters are created to be small characters, all right? Just to get some structure for the login system. We're also gonna do some simple validation here. So if username length is bigger than 12 or password.length is bigger than 12, let's just return some JSON here. Success, false, and also the message which we are accessing inside the front end. Let's say an error occurred, please try again. So really has some basic server-side validation to make sure that we're not getting super long username and password texts. This is already validated on the front end, but if someone mixtures with the front end, they can still get by. And after that, let's just return since nothing more happens. Then we're gonna check if the user exists in the database. So let's just create variable let here called calls. We can pass the username, check if that username exists. So db.query, and a simple MySQL statement here, select all from user. The star here in MySQL means all. where username equals with question mark. We can limit that query, so we'll get one result maximum. And we're gonna pass in the username inside the calls variable. We're also gonna get, if we get an error, we need to access the error. We need to access the data and the fields. All right. So let's start off with error handling. So if error res.json success false, and message again, let's just copy it. Copy this, and error occurred, please try again. And again, let's just return false. If there's not an error, we can continue. So let's check first that the data exists. So if data and data.length equals with 1, so we found one user with this username. We're gonna use bcrypt here to also check that the password provided by the user that is logging in is the correct password in the database. So we're gonna use bcrypt compare method for this. I'm gonna pass in the password that the user provides. I'm also gonna use the password we're getting from the user from the database. So we're just comparing these to check that they are the same when hashed. And let's say bcrypt error or verified. We can check here if verified. So this is gonna come back as a boolean true or false. It's gonna be true if the password compares. Then we're gonna start a session. So we're gonna say request.session, request.session.user ID, and we're gonna set this to data0.id. So now we're actually starting a session here, which we then can come back and check if it exists. All right, that way we can re-access the data from this user. And we're setting a property here for the session called user ID. And then everything's successful. So let's say success true. We're also gonna return the username, if you remember that. So we can display it to the user, right? In the same call here. So we won't have to do any more API calls for that. And if not verified, let's say result.json. Success is then of course false. Let's send back a message which will be alerted in the front end. Invalid password. All right. So that's it for the actual login method. Let's check if it works as well. So npm start, right click, inspect network to see what we're getting. Let's just type something random here. And it's called to login. Let's see here. We're getting username, password. We do not get a response. However, let's see what's wrong here. Of course, we have missed a statement here. We have only provided if the user exists. Else, this is an error if the user doesn't exist. Success false, and then the message should be user not found. Please try again. So let's restart and check now. And we're getting the error here from the front end, user not found. Please try again. Just gonna check the response here as well. So yeah, perfect. So the login API call is actually working. We will create the logout and is logged in routes as well before we try anything more. So let's start by creating the logout. So app post. This is called logout from the front end. Request response, same thing here. And now we just have to check if the session property user ID is set. If it's set and the user wants to log out, we can call session destroy to end the session for the user. And then rest.json, success, true. Let's go and return true here to stop executing any more code. If not set, let's just result.json, success, false, because you can't log in if there's not a session set, right? Let's also return here. Let's return false. All right. Then we got the last endpoint here. Can just go ahead and copy this. And this is then called isLogin. This is the API endpoint we're using to check whether or not the user is actually logged in. So the first thing we can do is check rec.session.userid. So if the user ID property is set on the session, create a new calls variable, pass in the session.userid, and then run a new query here on the database and do select all from user where ID equals with the call we're gonna pass in. Let's limit one here as well. So the ID is then gonna be the user ID that we're setting when we're starting the session in the login, right? Just gonna check here if we can also find this user when we want to check if the user is logged in. So we're gonna check again if data and data.length equals with 1. Then we are successful, because that means the user is actually logged in, the session ID is set and it exists. And return the username as well. So data, first element in the array, and the username property. And let's just return true here. So if there's no data, let's just return JSON success false. So that means this user ID actually exists, but this user does not exist in the database. So there's something wrong there, right? And else, so if session ID is not set at all, we're just gonna say success false. And that's all the three statements we need to care about. So let's go ahead now and try to start the application and open it up. Let's see, let's first try to log in with some invalid credentials. Is not found. The form is reset. Let's try John, a user that exists, password 12345, log in. And as you can see now, a session actually started. All right. Now if you open up the database, my app, you can see we also got this sessions table. And this is the session that was set by John when he logged in, right? So now it's stored in the database here. And if we refresh, it should return. It's not. Let's see what's wrong. So first we're setting is logged in here, and we're getting success false. So let's see. So if the user ID is set, which it should be. Oh, that's a problem. We're not passing in the calls. Let's try now. And hit npm start. Reload. And yeah, now everything seems to be working. So if we refresh, we're taken to the member area page. So the only problem here was that we were not actually passing in the user ID in the MySQL query, because it has to compare the ID, which we did not do since we didn't pass in the ID. All right, let's try to clear here, log out. Success true. Refresh. Let's try to log in as another user. Password 12345. Refresh, and another user is now logged in. And let's open up sessions and check. So this is for the session for another user now. All right. Now if we close this tab completely, reopen it, the session is still going. All right. So the only way to destroy the session right now with our settings is to either wait 5 years or click log out. All right. So that's it for the API. It's actually finished. We got these 3 simple endpoints, and the front end is also finished. If you want to do further changes to the front end of the application, just open up the front end here and change whatever you want, rebuild it, try other stuff, and then run npm build and paste it to the backend folder where we are serving the React JS app inside Node. All right, and you can also, in the backend, you can develop the router here further. This is just a simple router. You could, for example, have a route that's called session route, where you handle register, log in, log out, and everything like that. Create a new route for each kind of part of the application. The reason I'm using a class-based router here is because it scales the application better. I want to put all the routes in here because the main JS file would get plotted with code, right? So that's it. That's how you create a simple login application in React JS and a backend for it in Node and Express, and connecting it to a MySQL database. So thank you and bye bye.